Turkish forces take control of Afrin, ousting the YPG. Is this the beginning of the end of the terror group? And what comes next for Afrin civilians? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Turkey's advance in northern Syria. Turkish troops, along with their Free Syrian Army allies, have been battling the YPG in northern Syria for the last 2 months as part of Operation Olive Branch. Now, Turkey's aim has been to rid the border region of the Syrian extension of the terrorist PKK. Ankara says they've been successful, but that doesn't mean their mission is complete. The YPG is now vowing to ramp up a guerrilla-style insurgency against Turkish forces, and Turkey has outlined plans to continue its advance into Manbij and beyond. So where does that leave Afrin civilians, and how much longer before Turkey can say the border is fully secure? That discussion in a moment, but first, this report from Shoaib Hassan.
Turkey's moment of triumph in a campaign that Turkish leaders say has worked out almost according to script. The capture of Afrin from the YPG. Operation Olive Branch was launched on the 20th of January, and it aimed to oust the Syrian offshoot of the PKK terrorist organization from territory south of Turkey's border. Now, Turkish armed forces say they've cleared 2,000 square kilometers, while killing or capturing more than 3,600 terrorists. 304 YPG and Daesh terror camps have also been destroyed, and 46 Turkish soldiers have been killed in the fighting.
Teröristlerin çoğu zaten kuyruklarını kıstırıp kaçmışlardır. Kalan kılıç artıklarını ve geride bıraktıkları tuzakları da özel birliklerimiz ve Özgür Suriye ordusu mensupları temizliyorlar. Afrin şehir merkezinde artık terör örgütünün paçavraları değil, huzurun ve güvenin sembolleri dalgalanıyor.
The operation largely seems to have united Turks and has approval from across the political spectrum. But Turkey's NATO allies haven't been so supportive. The European Parliament has criticized the operation, while pro-YPG groups have held anti-Turkey protests in major European cities.
With regards to Turkey's offensive, which has been going on in Afrin for about 50 days now, I share your concerns. I'm saying that the situation is critical and serious. I said it again just now.
The UN has also expressed concern over reports of civilian casualties, with the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights saying at least 200 have been killed. But Ankara completely rejects those claims, insisting civilian casualties have been avoided. The offensive has had a huge humanitarian impact, with thousands displaced due to the fighting. Turkish leaders say the return of refugees remains a top priority, but they also say they will push on towards the YPG's remaining stronghold in Manbij. That's also where US troops are stationed. So, will they intervene if Turkish forces march on Manbij? And what does the YPG's defeat in Afrin mean for their power in Syria? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Lawrence Korb. He is a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense. With me here in the studio is Yahya Al-Aridi. He is a member and media advisor for the Syrian Negotiation Commission. And Onur Erim. He is a political analyst and author. Thanks all so much for joining us. I'm going to begin in Washington with Lawrence Korb. You didn't exactly support Operation Olive Branch. Having seen, though, the capture of Afrin yesterday by Turkish forces in the FSA, have you changed your opinion at all?
No, I don't, because there was a lot of innocent civilians who have been killed. Taking down that statue, I think, sends the wrong signal to the Kurdish people. And what I really worry about now is whether, in fact, the Turks and their FSA allies will now decide to move on to Manbij, where you have U.S. forces. And as you saw, when the Russians began to move in that direction, the U.S. attacked them.
Okay. Let me turn to the studio now. I mean, that is, to be fair, a very legitimate concern, because we did see, it was the statue of Kawa, a Kurdish folk hero, fall in the wake of FSA and Turkish forces taking Afrin. We also heard, and I'll play this for you, the comments of one FSA fighter, FSA rebel, when Afrin was captured. I'd like you both to hear that.
Thank God, the city of Afrin has been liberated. If God is willing, we are going to Manbij, and after Manbij, towards Al-Hasaka. If God is willing, we will follow the Kurds wherever they are going. And also for the PKK and YPG, we are coming to you if God is willing.
So there we heard, we will follow the YPG and the PKK, and we will follow the Kurds wherever they go. At the very least, Onur, there's a serious image problem, and I think that might be trivializing it with what we've been seeing and hearing in the past 24 hours.
And there may very well be. But the point is, if we start to follow or look through the eyes of the Americans, of the U.S. State Department or what have you, thinking that YPG, PYD, PKK is the only, and if at all, a representation of the Kurdish people in the area, we will fall into this pit every single time. Free Syrian Army has, I'm sure, overwhelming number of majority of Kurds. So does Turkey, so does Iraq, so does Iran, and the entire region. So we shall look at this as from the eyes of the Kurds of the Mesopotamian greater region, not from State Department in DC, not from Langley, or not from Brussels. This is a region that will decide its own destiny. It will not be decided by the Americans, the British, the French, the Germans, as it has been for the last 100 years.
Okay, yeah, let me get your thoughts on that. I mean, Kurds are Syrians, they're your brothers in Syria. Do they have legitimate concerns here, having heard and seen what we just saw there?
Well, as you know, historically, for the past 50 years in Syria under the Ba'ath regime and under Assad's regime, Turks have been suffering. There is no real sympathy with them, neither from the United States, nor from Europe, nor from anybody, but they just utilized the uprising in Syria in 2011, and mainly the one that took advantage of all these things are certain political parties, in particular PYD, PYJ, and which were allies of PKK. And look at their treatment of the population, the Kurds population. The Kurds are our brothers, they are our case. They were with us, they were sympathizing against oppression, against aggression, against this tyranny of the Assad regime. Now, they have a very horrible propaganda. And at the same time, if you see what is happening in Syria and other areas, especially in Ghouta, we understand that the Western media in particular is trying to balance what Iran, what Russia are doing in other areas in Syria with what is happening in the north, in these areas. So this is unfair. The Turks were supposed to be finishing all this job, 12 points, according to Astana, in that area, and they have been slow all this time for 4, 5, 6 months, maybe more. Why? And they said it through our interaction with them, through the FSA interaction with them. They are slow because of their protection of human life, civilians. But there are certain symbolic things, like the statue of that thing, and like the hoisting of the flag, Turkish flag, and the FSA flag. They were together, they were fighters together, they raised these flags. If we look at things from a symbolic viewpoint, probably we would be just looking at a horrible thing. But because that the only flag that should be hoisted in that place in a Syrian land is a Syrian flag, the Syrian freedom flag. However, they were brothers in blood now. They were fighting somebody, exercising all sorts of terrorism against civilians, taking them hostages in order to control that land, and now things are different. So they took that step.
Okay, let me just be clear, though. Can Kurds rest assured that those who are not affiliated with the PKK, the YPG, or the PYD will not be targeted?
Of course not. And I told you about the delay in just getting into that area because of the protection of human life. Not Kurds, not Arabs.
Tell us then, who's in charge now? Who exactly is in charge of the region now?
Well, now power is talking. Military power is talking in these days. But later on, as we understand, as the agreements were between the FSA and Turkish forces, the local people would elect the people, those who are going to rule them, not a certain party which is described as being terrorist to determine their lives. No, they would be running their own lives. This is the agreement, and this is we are going to see this in the coming few months.
Okay, let me ask Lawrence Korb. I mean, as Turkey claims victory in Afrin, we heard Assad beginning to claim victory in eastern Ghouta. Where does this leave Assad's regime now? I mean, will the ultimate fear here, let's be honest, for Turkey in particular and Russia, is that the United States is looking at the partitioning of Syria. Is that what the U.S. wants to happen?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that the U.S. wants to protect those people in the YPG who helped us defeat ISIS. Remember, if it were not for them, ISIS would not have been defeated. The Russians and the Assad government and the Iranians really didn't do much against ISIS. They're the ones who took back Kobani and then Raqqa. If it were not for them, ISIS would control a lot more of Syria. And so that is the U.S. goal, is to protect them and to make sure ISIS doesn't come back. I think everybody agrees you need a negotiated solution here with the Russians and the Iranians, the Turks and the United States and the Assad government. Remember that in April 4th, the Turks are supposed to meet with the Russians and Iranians. Hopefully they can work out something there that will stop with Afrin, because if you go to Manbij, I think you're looking for a much bigger war. The U.S., as I say, even, killed about 200 Russian mercenaries when they got close.
Okay, Onur, I saw you laugh on the first comment there about ISIS never would have been defeated had it not been for...
Well, fortunately history, or unfortunately for some, the truth has a funny way of coming out sooner or later. Whenever I hear the comments about ISIS being defeated, in 3, 5, 10, 20 years down the road, we'll actually find out who actually compromised ISIS, because it did not grow out of the soils of Mesopotamia, that's for sure, by itself. But on the other hand, the Turkey's concern was genuine. It had to protect its borders, hence the rest of the country. Turkey's only mission, Turkey's first major concern was to protect itself. Then Turkey said, we will go in, we will only stay as much as needed. Our final thought here, our final goal here would be to have stability enough to have the region self-determinate its own future.
Okay.
That's what Turkey is there for. And whether this takes us to Manbij, to beyond, it will take whatever it will take. And as I said, going into Afrin, I will say the same thing probably as we, crawl towards Manbij operation. Every life that's lost or hurt on this endeavor, on the Turkish side or on the FSO side, the U.S. military and the U.S. government has a major stake in it. It will be their fault.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Let me respond here. I was talking about the caliphate. Now, you're never going to get rid of ISIS. That's an ideology, just like Al-Qaeda. But were it not for the YPG working with the United States, ISIS would still control those two cities. So this idea that they didn't do anything is nonsense. If their caliphate was undermined, basically, and the United States got involved in that way before the Russians came in to save Assad. And the Russians claimed they were going in there for ISIS. They never did. All they were doing was killing people in places like Aleppo and Ghouta, and ignoring all of the ceasefires. And remember, we're supposed to have a 1-month ceasefire going on right now. That has not stopped the Turks and their allies from moving into Afrin.
But Lawrence, Turkey has always said the United States could have fought ISIS with the help of Turkey and the FSA. They did not need to ally themselves with the YPG. And now...
That's nonsense. They were not in there in the beginning. No, but when we came in 2014, the Turks' main goal was to get rid of Assad. So this idea that they could have done nonsense. There was nobody back there then. And we had to partner to take Kobani and stop the fact that it looked like the ISIS was going to control the whole region. People forget how close they came even to getting to Baghdad back then.
Sir, when you say killing the Khalifa, are you maybe perhaps making a reference to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden? Like that, killing the Khalifa? Is that what you're talking about?
No, what I'm saying is that you will never completely stop these groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda until you undermine their ideology and the appeal that they have to people, unfortunately, in the Muslim world. That's the long-term goal. But the short-term goal...
But that battle...
So killing the Khalifa just like the U.S. did Osama bin Laden for Al-Qaeda, the same Osama bin Laden that it greeted in the Saudi embassy 15 years ago and hugged by, I guess it was Jimmy Carter, if my memory recollects well. Just wanted to make sure I'm following through your thought process is all.
It was, I think, under Reagan, if I'm not mistaken.
But
yeah, I would actually like to move on, though, if we can, to the Manbij, what could be the Manbij operation, and trying to get the U.S. and Turkey on the same side to fight what Turkey sees as a legitimate battle that it just proved was what it was, an Operation Olive Branch in Afrin. I'm going to have to go back to Lawrence for this because the U.S. State Department has just changed hands again. Will this new person in charge want to work with Turkey in Manbij, or are we going to see the same divide between two NATO allies fighting on the ground in Syria?
I don't think it's going to change much. If anything, if Mike Pompeo gets confirmed, he's much harder on this whole situation. The key player here is Secretary Mattis, and if you listen to what he said when he was just recently in the region, he made it clear that the U.S. forces will not allow the YPG people to be overrun in places like Manbij and Raqqa. And remember, we've got troops there. And I think everybody was surprised when we went after the Russian mercenaries. And basically, Putin claimed they weren't Russian, but the fact is that they were, Russian mercenaries. And I think that's important. The United States has basically drawn a red line here. And I hope that they can solve this through negotiation. And remember, it's not just the United States, as you had in the run-up to the program, it's the European community, the Red Cross, and everybody is not happy with what happened in Afrin.
Okay. Yeah, let me get your take here on what you've heard, and also if we can move on to another major objective of Operation Olive Branch, which was to get refugees to be able to return to their homes. Where do you stand?
Well, let me just refer back to certain things that are said by your guest in Washington. When he said that had it not been for the United States and PYD and PKK or whatever, which is classified as terrorist organization, ISIS wouldn't have been defeated. I don't know whether this claim is true or the claim by Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin from Hamimim military station in Syria claimed that he defeated Daesh, ISIS. We don't know who is the victorious now. And nobody pays attention to the Syrian people, to the Free Syrian Army, to those who are fighting Daesh. Daesh is like a company, just everybody contributed to. Remember, from the very beginning, Turkey called for a no-fly zone in the northern area. And the United States did not respond to that at all. And that created all this problem. And it just did that in a form of proxy. The PYD were used as proxies. as the Hezbollah militia were used as proxies. And everybody had their proxies, the United States, Russia. Now Turkey is just making an ally with those Syrian people who were forced to carry weapons in order to defend themselves, and fighting those terrorists who took their people, Arabs and Kurds, as hostages, and it's trying to liberate that place. And this takes me to your point about how do we do about just those people, refugees, etc. Now, those refugees were out there in order just to single out those PYD people, terrorists, in order to bring people back to where they were when they were displaced by PYD and others. Now, at the same time, they are forcing people to flee in order to show the world that those forces, the Turks and the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, the indigenous population of those areas were forcing those people to flee in order to give this image that those are behaving like the Assad regime, behaving like the Iranians, behaving like the Russians, what they are doing in Ghouta these days. Now, the overall situation is everybody is taking care of their own interests, and nobody is paying attention to Syrian people who have been through this saga, this Holocaust for the past 7 years, with a regime being supported by Russia all the time, from air bombardment, from Iranian militias, and at the same time, there is somebody there who doesn't want this tyrant to leave and let people live. This is the problem we are having, and everybody having their conflicts, struggle in their conflicts, and we are paying the price for all these things. This is what's happening. And nobody pays attention to the people, to the thousands of people. Half of Syria is destroyed now. Half of the country's population is displaced to different parts of the world. And over 500,000 killed, 250,000 in jails. Right. All these things nobody pays attention to. Now we care about ISIS gone and who is to be given the medal for defeating ISIS.
Okay, Onur, we just have a minute left. I mean, Operation Olive Branch is going to continue. Is there the possibility that this could get worse for civilians before it gets better?
Well, Turkey has been doing a lot to make sure that the civilian casualties are to the minimum. And just the way you see, with the easiness, military side, easiness of the operation shows you, Turkey could have done this within a matter of a week if it not had cared about civilian casualties. I think I don't know the figures, but it's probably one of the most minimal levels in any operation in the history of the world. And hopefully it will only get better for everybody, because when Turkey goes into a region, as we have seen in the earlier days of this operation, people started coming back, settling down as they saw security. People started having food, medicine, doctors, what have you, the basic human needs.
When will Turkey say mission accomplished?
Turkey will say is mission accomplished when its border and hence the inner security of the country is under a secure line. That's it, nothing beyond.
And Lawrence Korb, when will the United States be able to, if I can use the word, reconcile with its NATO ally over what's happening in Syria?
Well, I hope so, because the last thing we need to see is a conflict between two NATO allies, because the Russians and the Iranians come out ahead if that happens.
I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, President Putin re-elected again. But with victory never in doubt, we ask what the country's opposition hopes to achieve. And the UN says Rodrigo Duterte needs a psychiatric evaluation after placing one of its top human rights investigators on a list of terrorists. We speak to the woman herself. Now, while some elections can be described as hotly contested, Russia's presidential election on Sunday was anything but. Vladimir Putin's victory surprised no one. And after getting more than 76% of the vote, Putin will lead the Russian Federation for at least 6 more years. His latest victory is a significant improvement over 2012, but is that because he's become more popular or because he has no real opposition? Here's Simon McGregor-Wood from Moscow.
Да, точно. Вы наша общая команда. Я член вашей команды. И все, кто сегодня голосовал, это наша большая общенациональная команда.
Vladimir Putin's presidential victory has come as no surprise, giving him another 6 years in power.
Чем он во всем мире, просто никого не видно, просто. Нет ему равных по степени его...
Просто никто, наверное, не хочет перемен. Как бы привыкли к одному человеку, но думают, что хуже-то не будет. Пускай еще посидит немножко.
Putin won more than 75% of the vote after running against 7 other candidates, but none ever stood a chance. They were all pre-approved. And Putin's biggest critic, Alexei Navalny, was banned from running since he was convicted for embezzlement, a charge he says was politically motivated. Putin came in well ahead of his nearest competitor, Communist Party candidate Pavel Grudinin, at 13.2%. Results for all other candidates were in single figures. This victory makes Putin Russia's longest-serving leader, second only to Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. And the opposition has cried foul.
Ясно, что подсчет голосов и вообще вся процедура выборов была нечестной.
The turnout may have been lower than Mr. Putin wanted, but it was still well above 60%, and that's probably good enough. Critics say many voters were compelled to turn up to polling stations to boost the turnout. They were offered things like free pastries and vegetables, in some cases even free blood tests. And many videos have emerged of what appears to be officials stuffing ballot boxes with fraudulent votes. But despite all that, President Putin will claim this result as a huge vote of confidence.
Мы будем думать о будущем нашей великой Родины, о будущем наших детей. И действуя так, мы, безусловно, обречены на успех. Да?
Over the past 18 years, Putin has successfully pushed out rival oligarchs and any viable opposition. And his latest victory will be seen as a show of force towards the West. That reached a peak in a pre-election speech where he revealed new nuclear weapons, including a missile he says could reach almost any point in the world.
Любое применение ядерного оружия против России или ее союзников, малой, средней, до какой угодно мощности, мы будем рассматривать как ядерное нападение на нашу страну. Ответ будет мгновенным и со всеми вытекающими последствиями.
Moscow has entered a diplomatic war with the UK over the poisoning of a former Russian spy. What's less certain is who Putin's eventual heir could be, or whether an opposition would ever be capable of taking over the helm. Putin has laughed off the idea of yet another term in office.
Но мне кажется, что то, что вы говорите, немножко смешно. Давайте посчитаем. Я что, до 100 лет, что ли, буду сидеть? Нет.
Putin must step down as Russia's president in 2024, but some expect him to either scrap term limits or shift into another role and remain in the Kremlin for a long time to come. Simon McGregor-Wood, The Newsmakers, in Moscow.
Let's get straight to our panel now. In Moscow, we're joined by Sergei Markov. He is a former Kremlin aide and is now the director of the Institute of Political Studies. From London, we have Vladimir Ashurkov. He is the executive director of the Russian Anti-Corruption Foundation, as well as a close ally of one of Putin's fiercest critics, Alexei Navalny. And finally, from Paris is Marcel van Herpen. He is a Russia expert and author of the book Putin's Propaganda Machine, Soft Power and Russian Foreign Policy. Thanks all so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let me begin in London. Vladimir, today the OSCE gave its assessment of the fairness and the transparency of Sunday's election in Russia, and it said that a choice without real competition is not real choice. Do you think the majority of Russians got what they wanted in this election?
Well, it's true that these elections didn't have any competition, and their result was determined a long time ago. The list of candidates was carefully engineered so that they don't present really any alternative to Vladimir Putin. there was a lot of pressure to get people to the voting booths. People were bussed on the election day to the voting stations, and with the assumption that they would vote for Putin. And also the election observers have discovered a great number of violations, ballot stuffing, people who voted multiple times. So the results was determined, and I don't think that's what Russian people really voted for.
Sergei, I will assume you don't agree.
Just, you know, you even cannot imagine how Mr. Ashurkov, far from reality, he lives in all propagandistic tales, fantastic, and you know, look at the figures. Vladimir Putin got support of the 77% or 56 millions of Russian voters. It's increased from the previous elections from 45. So he got additionally something 20% of the votes, and with very high turnout.
Okay.
Why? Why? It's very easily because people support Vladimir Putin and Russia. And look, for example, if you believe that's propaganda, look at the figures of the Russian citizens who living abroad in another cities. You can see a huge line near the Russian embassies, and the Putin's popularity among the Russians who can watch TV channels of another countries even more, 85%. Its high support of Vladimir Putin is Russian patriotic response to
Sergei,
this.
Let me ask you this then. Okay, we understand, and we've said those same numbers in our report as well. But if Vladimir Putin is so popular that the vast majority of Russians do want him to stay on as leader, why ban Alexei Navalny? Why quash opposition rallies and try to stop an opposition from becoming stronger? If you're so confident that this is what Russians want, Putin is what Russians want.
You know, two reasons and one additional main idea. One reason, Alexei Navalny is a corrupted politician. He's been economic advisor to the Russian governor of Nikita Belykh, who now sitting in the prison, getting 8 years. Alexei Navalny, really corrupted politician, and he not in prison because soft Russian law, but nevertheless he punished by court, and this court didn't allow him to take part in election because he corrupted politician by decision of court. Second idea, Alexei Navalny just agent of the international, first of all, American intelligence service community, and they want him to take part in elections. They probably, they wanted to kill him to undermine legitimacy. And also, can you imagine how Alexei Navalny could be seriously regarded as an opponent if he didn't support Crimea rejoining with Russia, and he never accused Kiev neo-Nazi junta.
Okay.
And, you know, he's
Vladimir,
not regarded as democratic leader.
Okay, Vladimir, I'll let you respond to that because it was a direct comment on the candidate that you would have supported if had he been allowed to run. But let me first get to Marcel van Herpen and just get your thoughts on what you've heard so far. Plus, if you can go on to what you expect for Russia now in the next 6 years under the same leadership.
Yes, I think so. It's important, these elections. It's important because of it is the last election, between marks, the last election for Putin, and for the next 6 years he has to finish his job. And Putin is a man with a high sense of mission, and his mission is in fact not to reconstruct and rebuild the Soviet Union, as he himself says, but I think that he has an interest in restoring the Slavic core of the old Soviet Union. That means that he will be more active and even aggressive toward Ukraine, and we can see in the next years a more aggressive policy. We have also seen that in a big speech of March 1st, before the two parliaments, that there was a lot of talk about the new Russian weapon system. It was a rather threatening speech mentioning new huge super weapons. So I think the next 6 years we will see a new Putin, that is the old Putin, but in a more aggressive and imperialist way.
Okay. Vladimir, let me get back to you then. I mean, I'd like for you as well to comment on if you believe that is the direction, as Marcel was saying, that Russia is going in. And in that, where does it leave any political opposition to Putin?
Sure, I think it's likely that the trends that we've seen over the last term of Mr. Putin, which is international isolation, which is low economic growth, and which is state meddling in all kinds of affairs of society, it's likely that it will continue. It's true that Russian opposition at this point is not strong enough to take on this corrupt autocratic government heads-on, because our opponents have all the administrative power, they have unlimited financial resources. At the same time, the existing Putin's regime is becoming more and more fragile, and it is unlikely to tackle successfully the challenges that will be mounted over the next 6 years. A lot of people in Russia are unhappy. The business elite have seen their fortunes decimated by the low economic growth, by the aggressive Russian stance against international community, and they have no access to capital markets. So there are a lot of people who are unhappy at the top, and people with low incomes. They see their real incomes falling. They see Russian healthcare and education infrastructure falling apart, and this eventually will lead to a political crisis when the Russian opposition will have a chance, and we're preparing for that.
Okay, and Sergei, there are also concerns that this is supposed to be a 6-year term for Putin, at which point someone else will run for leadership, but there are many who say that he will either attempt to change the constitution so that he can run again, or do what we saw last time, put himself forward as prime minister, in which case he can actually hold the reins of power and put what some are saying would be a puppet figure up for president.
I don't know what will be in 6 years. I suppose that it will be new elections, and I suppose that Vladimir Putin will choose some of the Russian politicians who will continue his political course, because this political course is strongly supported by a full majority of Russian people. So it's reasonable to continue those policy, which is regarded by majority of the citizens as right policy with good result. It's exactly Vladimir Putin's policy. And I think now we will have a continuation of Vladimir Putin's Putin policy. First of all, the main target will be modernization of Russian economy. It will be not so easy to do in conditional sanction, of course, but we understand that sanction is not because aggressive policy of Russia, but on contrary, sanction is aggression against Russia, who just to protect interests of Russians. And Mr. Ashurkov, I want to recommend you. You should, if you want to be Russian politician, you want to be popular Russian politician, you should defend interests of Russian citizens, but not interests of Russian enemies. And more enemies of Russia attack Vladimir Putin, more Russian citizens support Vladimir Putin. It's absolutely clear.
Vladimir, I'll let you respond.
If we look at the elections that just happened, there was not a single candidate on the roster of candidates who was against the international isolation of Russia, who was against state meddling in the economy and in society, in private matters of people, who was against increasing military expenditures. This all happened so that Vladimir Putin wouldn't have alternative in these elections. At the same time, a big portion of Russian population would like to see government, turn its face towards its citizens and improve healthcare, education, work on increasing the real incomes of people, having less aggressive stance towards the Western countries, and decrease the expenditures on military and other security services.
Okay, Marcel, let me ask you.
Let me say just one word. We know it's not true. Two candidates, Ksenia Sobchak and Grigory Yavlinsky, suggested that, first of all, Russia should have good relation with the West to take off sanctions. And they got 3% altogether. So your program is supported by 3% of the Russian people. Everybody can vote for them, but people decided vote not for you, not for Mrs. Sobchak, Mr. Yavlinsky, and the British American Intelligence Service, but for Mr. Putin.
Okay, Marcel, let me ask you, do what Putin's supporters perceive as Western attacks on Russia and this creation of an international Russia-phobia actually play into Putin's hands when he perpetuates the image of a stronger Russia that can counteract this kind of discrimination and Russia-phobia that the West is using against the Russian people?
Yes, I don't believe in the word Russophobia, in fact. Russophobia is...
They are the words of the foreign minister of Russia.
That means it's some kind... Yes, but it means that it is some kind of a psychological illness, that you have a phobia from a certain thing and that's irrational. I think the fear in the West of Russia is rational. It's not a phobia. And it's because of Russian threats. And these threats are multidimensional. We have seen in the influence of Russia in the elections in France, Germany, and in the United States especially. We see the populist parties that are supported by Russia. We see the financing. We have seen the poisoning. So there are so many things happening, and they're happening all the time, that the trust in Russia has gone down. To call it Russophobia is a false word. The West is threatened, and also our liberal democratic order is threatened by Russia. So we should take countermeasures to counter these threats.
Okay, Sergei, we have about 30 seconds. I'll give you a chance then to respond.
Yeah, please allow to Russians to talk about Russophobia, so as allow Jewish people to talk about anti-Semitism. It's something like you, people like you are, teach to the Jewish people 100 years ago in Europe, when anti-Semitism had been a rise. Oh, you shouldn't talk about anti-Semitism, but we should talk more about aggression Jewish. Same Russophobia will be claimed as criminal ideology, as now anti-Semitism, which is very good to claim as criminal ideology and political practice.
Okay, Sergei Markov, you will have the last word. I'd like to thank all three of our panelists, Vladimir Ashurkov and Marcel van Herpen, for joining us on this edition of the Newsmakers.
This is absolutely disgraceful that the president of a country could speak in this way, using the foulest of language against a rapporteur that's highly respected. And really it makes one believe that the president of the Philippines needs to submit himself to some sort of psychiatric evaluation. This sort of comment really is unacceptable.
Well, what does a UN special rapporteur, an ex-Philippine congressman, and 4 former Catholic priests have in common? Well, according to President Rodrigo Duterte, they are all dangerous communist terrorists. Last month, his government filed a petition to have them, along with more than 600 others, officially listed as terrorists for their alleged links to the Communist Party of the Philippines and its armed wing, the New People's Army. That petition allows the government to scrutinize and monitor the movements and finances of all those listed, including a United Nations employee. And that employee, UN Special Rapporteur Victoria Talia Cortes, was set to appear on our show last week, but just when our interview was scheduled, she had to flee the Philippines, saying she feared for her life after appearing on that list. But I am glad to say she joins us now from Geneva. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Victoria. First, if you can, bring us back to why you decided to flee. Was your life genuinely in danger?
Well, I really didn't flee. I just had a meeting that I am having here in Geneva, and I had just to come earlier because the lawyers advised me that there might be a whole departure order if I'm going to leave later.
Okay, and what would that mean for you and your work?
Well, if there's such a thing, if the whole departure order is going to be done, then that means that I won't be able to travel outside of the country, when in fact my mandate as a UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples is to visit countries who have invited me to look into the situation of indigenous peoples. And this means countries all over the world where indigenous peoples are.
Okay, let's be clear then. I don't want to exaggerate. So you didn't actually fear for your safety or for your life or that of your family members or friends. You actually were more concerned about not being able to do your work properly because you appear on this list?
Well, no, I also fear for my life, of course, and of that of my family, because, as you know, in the Philippines right now, there is a context of extrajudicial killings happening against so-called drug addicts or drug dealers. So, being included in such a list is basically putting you in a high risk, because they can also order their subordinates to do what they think should be done against us, those of us in the list. So I do fear for my life, but I was just thinking that because this is a civil case, they would not issue a whole departure order yet.
Okay, now the government says that you are, by law in the Philippines, allowed to fight your listing here, and that the institutions in the Philippines are strong enough to make sure that you're given a fair hearing and a fair case to plead. Do you believe that's true? Do you trust the system in the Philippines?
Well, I don't believe that's true, because we already have a lot of cases in the Philippines where some individuals were charged with trump-up charges, and also there were some, evidences were planted so that these individuals can be arrested. So that is the situation in my country now, and I think that saying that the opportunity for me to defend myself is a mistake, because it's them who have to prove I'm innocent until, they are able to prove that I'm guilty. So they are putting the burden of proof on me and not on them who are giving these charges.
So in pleading your innocence here, I mean, tell us, what is your relationship with the Communist Party of the Philippines and therefore with the New People's Army?
I absolutely have no relationship with the Communist Party of the Philippines nor the New People's Army, nor have I been involved in the cases that they have mentioned in the petition. So I absolutely deny any connection whatsoever.
And then why are they targeting you?
I think that this is being done in retaliation of the press statement that my colleague Cecilia Jimenez and I made in December last year regarding the displacement of indigenous peoples in Mindanao, as well as the impacts of martial law on them. And after we made those statements, the spokesperson came up with a statement saying that we are embarrassing the Philippine government internationally. So I see that this inclusion of my name in the list is really an act of retaliation by the government, because they feel that we are attacking the government in relation to what's happening with indigenous peoples in Mindanao.
Okay, and you feel you are in the Philippines, and part of your job is to protect people whose rights are being suppressed, whose lives may be in danger because of government policy. Do you think the Philippine public is aware of what you're trying to do, and do they support you?
Well, yes, there is a lot of newspaper coverage in the Philippines and also television coverage about the issues of indigenous peoples who have been displaced from their ancestral territories, and some have been killed and some have been arrested arbitrarily. So the people know about this issue.
Okay.
And I think it's not a secret. The news comes out very often.
But what is of concern, and I think something we've learned from the rise of Duterte in the Philippines, is that the Philippine people are willing, in a sense, to sacrifice certain rights and arguably some innocent lives in order to reduce crime in the country and to bring security to the Philippines. Can you relate to that?
No, I cannot relate to that because those people who have been, in fact, killed in this drug war are innocent. They are claiming their innocence, and there is no data whatsoever to show that, you know, the level of crime has decreased because of these drug killings. So I don't relate to that at all. I feel that
but why
these
do you think so many
didn't
Filipino
enjoy
people
due
do?
process. Well, I think that there is some view that the Philippines needs a strong man, you know, to get rid of these drug addicts and drug dealers. So I think that's why some people believe in what is happening.
Okay. Victoria Talia Corpus, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Remember, you can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, we look at the U.S. war in Iraq, 15 years on, and ask how a military operation went from shock and awe to a protracted quagmire. Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.